Good morning to the Caron Chapel YouTube, and those of you again, good morning, and anybody watching on live stream on campus. A pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you this morning. The message for today is organized around a theme word, as is customary for us. This particular word, constancy, came across my radar many years ago in seminary in the study of Christian virtues. But I've learned in keeping after the word in my mind and heart for a long time that that's not the only place where the word gets some attention. And I'd like to just line it up with a variety of converging sort of occasions that are also in view for me and that nicely seem to have an extraordinary synergy with one another. So also in my mind is, in my practice, so when I was in seminary and studied Christian virtues, I also became very interested in the liturgical calendar of the Christian year. And it helped me in my early recovery to be given this idea that time had this overlay of meaning. And I had never, I guess I was one of those Christmas and Easter observant people, but I didn't really get the whole story, and I was probably more interested in what was under the tree or in the bottle on the bar than I was really in the narratives that attend to these ways in which the wisdom traditions of the world mapped their stories onto time, which is really cool. So the Christian liturgical year begins the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas, so right after Thanksgiving, typically, and it's a countdown, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there are these things called Advent candle wreaths that you may see in worshiping communities with 4 candles, a big central white candle, and then, which may or may not be present. There's a lot of variability in the way communities observe these ritual practices. And even the 4 themes of Advent, hope, peace, joy, and love, that's the way I learn them, but there are some communities that shuffle the order of those topics. The 3rd week is almost always the joy week, and it's associated with the rose candle of the wreath. But there's so much variability. Anyway, today is a love-themed Sunday for me, and constancy and love are close correlates. Tonight is the beginning of Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is something that my Jewish friends and teachers and mentors have taught me a good deal about. It's a really interesting observance. I think garners more attention in contexts where Christianity and Christmas are blazoned in front of us in terms of its actual balance of significance in the Jewish calendar. It's not as primary as Passover or the high holidays, those kind of things. But it's a beautiful 8-day period with gifting, and I think that's one of the things that helps, bring it to a certain prominence. And we're going to have the opening Hanukkah readings today. Thank you to Lisa who volunteered to do them for us. And it's a miracle story of the love that God has for the community of Israel in a time of struggle. When they think that they only have enough fuel to keep one sacred candle lit, this candle stays lit for 8 days. And, there's no other explanation than the extraordinary manifestation of this constancy of God. And so that's a cool story. I mentioned in my trying to pick readings for today that we'll also hear a reading later that is associated with the winter solstice. And it's no accident, if you look at history, that in the northern hemisphere, the alignment of the festival of light traditions and the Jewish observance of Hanukkah and the Christian observance of Christmas happened right around the winter solstice, because they're good news in the middle of shadow. And there again, I'm going to appropriate meaning and sort of stick it on where I want it, but love helps us get through times of trouble, and especially constancy. A way of understanding what is meant specifically for me by constancy is to offer it as a contrast to unreliability. It's a word that works wonderfully for talking about steadfastness and that sure knowledge that I can trust in, on, or with the party which is manifesting constancy for me. And it might be our loved ones, which would be great, but it may also be an idea that the divine is constant, and it may be myself, right? I can be a faithful contributor to my own journey, or a mess, right? And all of those, I can be unreliable with each other, I can be unreliable in my relationship with the God of my understanding, or this subject, the subject of love and how it works, is one that is more nuanced than I understood when I was a kid. And I think that's one of the challenges of growing children into adulthood, is that we present them binary, black and white, clearly delineated categories, when in fact the world is much more complicated in matters of faith and relationship and all that sort of stuff. The simple binaries are as hard to sustain. I don't mean to mess anybody up, but it's like the Santa Claus understanding. So I'm in trouble if I say that in this room, but I will be looking at my door for the sleigh at midnight. And I did that all my life, and I'm very comfortable with that. So where I was going is to say that people come to these messages, the chapel messages, because they have a tether to the phenomenon of substance use disorder, as it's called today medically, addiction. And that's why you're probably tuning in on YouTube or here in the room, is that either you are a person who has a substance use disorder, or you're connected to somebody who does, and you may be very advanced in your journey of personal recovery, which family members and individuals with substance use disorder all participate in journeys of recovery. You could be a novice, you could be a person who is trying to restart or whatever, but addiction is a piece of this puzzle. And my experience as a person in long-term recovery myself is that love and constancy are both really important and really not simple in this territory. And why I say that is, early on in my recovery, one of the things that I was exposed to was the work of a woman named Melody Beatty. I don't know if any of you know her signature text in the 1970s, I think was when it was written, called Codependent No More. And I went to ACOA meetings. Today they're called ACA meetings. There's a whole history of all that stuff. And I heard this thing that was called the laundry list, which is a set of characteristics of people who were influenced by Melody Beatty's work and by this 12-step movement for families that are affected by substance use disorder. And the laundry list, even in itself, shows how complicated this is, because one or two of them are conflicting with each other. So, and this is the morass of navigating how to love when one of the pieces of the puzzle around the love challenge is addiction. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like, because as a parent or a husband or wife or adult child of an aging parent or whatever like that, you come into these quandaries where what you think is loving, where you get labeled as an enabler, and what people are also telling you would be loving is to pull back and set healthy boundaries and let them die on their own sword or roast on their own spit. Like it's and this is love? Like, that's a very challenging reframe of what love looks like. And I'm guessing there's wisdom in this room about both how difficult this is and how, frankly, there's a truth to the challenge that the simplicity of love that we learned about as children, that the romantic, I'm always there and there's no problems, and it's the fairy tale love, is a lovely thing to fantasize about, but it, as soon as you introduce the bottle of Johnny Walker or the fentanyl or cocaine, it gets way more messy than that. And So one of the things that's been really meaningful to me as a clinician in this work is watching a shift that the clinicians have made or are making. And we've not made it as an industry, I hate that word, as a field of medicine, as skillfully as I hope we ultimately will. But there's been this massive sense of imperative of changing of language for people who have the kind of jobs that I have and my colleagues have. So we've been told that even the word relapse is a little brutal, and that we should be celebrating people who are continuing to stay in care, and that there's a lot of our language that was shaming and merits rethinking, and a lot of that's desperately true. If you had come to Caron 50 years ago, there was a like, sit down, shut up, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. Those were expressions that I grew up in my early recovery 30 years ago that still hung around. And there's still people who sort of take this like, your best ideas got you here kind of, people who suffer from addiction are knuckleheads and they need strong guidance. And sadly, there's been a bunch of, I shouldn't say sadly, there's been a lot of research to show that's a terribly ineffective way to kind of sneak up on a person who's addicted. It may work for a person who's like really shame comfortable, and when you point fingers and punish them as the beginning entry, they can accommodate that and still listen. But many of our patients are way too sophisticated and self-willed and flare a kind of resistance, which I know I had. I mean, if somebody called me stupid, I'd be like, I'm going to turn the other way, right? So part of this love thing is to find ways that are less confrontational, shaming, antagonistic, to nonetheless support change, right? What we don't want to do is write a permission slip for the continuation of pain and misery in our own or other people's lives. I think that's an axiom. I always think when we're in this ethics, it's really helpful to find things that we can grab and hold on to. And that's one of them. It's harm reduction. Whatever we can do to sort of avoid enhancing people's suffering is probably wise, although there's a caveat to that, which is sometimes there's necessary suffering that reduces ultimate suffering, right? So you can't always take the easier, softer way. That's an old AAism. And in the end, recovery becomes the easier, softer way. That's another one. There's all kinds of contradictions in this terrain. So let me remember a few of the things. I have enough material to talk for hours about this stuff, but I know I don't really serve you or myself or the topic by being anything less than sort of focused. So I did have a profound aha in thinking about the subject this week. And that was that the reliance that wisdom traditions invite, we call it faith, which gets a lot of emphasis in some of the recovery movements and threads, is a safe reliance. And that what I think happens to those of us, I'm a person who suffers from addiction, and I still can be very addictive. I hate to tell you about my relationship with Christmas cookies, but if you were watching me, you'd be like, that's where his disease is now manifesting. I don't eat cookies, I do cookies. And I'll confess I'm planning on baking more. But let me use the example of cookies. Because like Johnny Walker Red, like fentanyl, like sadly the gambling or the paid sex worker encounter or these kinds of things, they substitute for connection. People crave them, right? That's a word that we use. We crave and we go and seek out this thing. But my aha was, it's not smart. It's not wise. It doesn't know when to be tough and when to be soft. It doesn't have the capacity to provide authentic love and authentic relationship, which authentic relationship is tough. I don't know that anybody out there, we live in a time when I think this is really important material to think about, but our only hope is to manifest it locally, because the world that we encounter in the news is nuts. And I don't know where to point you in our heroes or our politics or our ethics or whatever that are out there to tell you that that's where you can learn how to do relationship. But I will say the wisdom traditions of old have stuff to teach us about that, even if the practitioners of it have messed it up. And that tried and true things that our great-grandparents wanted to hand on. And I just spent yesterday with grandchildren. I was just talking with June Bear about our granddaughters. And, oh, gosh, they're so funny and beautiful and amazing. And they have so much yet ahead of them that I don't know how to protect them from. But one of the things I want them to know is that Nene, my wife, and Jack, which is what they call me, which is fine, I'm grandparent via stepchildren, but I want them to know that we are there for them. That we are like a lighthouse in the dark, dangerous sea. And that we will manifest constancy for them. And that doesn't mean that anything goes, right? It means you're not going to misbehave at the table. It means that you can be wild and crazy in the living room, but we're going to clean up our toys. It means all these, what was that book, Robert Fulton, the Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, right? And wisdom, drugs are dumb. That's my big point. Sophisticated, right? Somehow we all knew this, but I don't know that I've ever sort of connected those dots to think that what I was doing was I was drinking from a poison well. I was looking for love in the wrong place. I was migrating my desperate need for healthy, meaningful, quality attachment and giving it to Johnny Walker and Jose Cuervo and Jack Daniels. And they're labels on a bottle. They cannot shift their game. They cannot roll with me when I need something different. And they cannot discern when tough love makes sense or when writing a check is a good idea, right? So this is what our message and challenge is. And there's a subset of the persons in this audience who find it meaningful to articulate their dependence on other than themselves in terms of faith and God language. I'm one of those. I'm sensitive that that's not the whole room. But I want to say that those of us who do think about faith and a power greater than ourselves, and even those who participate in the non-theistic wisdom traditions, will find that what you're doing is you're relying on an ancient stream of wisdom that mediates a kind of accountability and reliability that's steadfast and rock solid, and you can follow the Eightfold Path, or you can continue every year to come back again and again to the story of Jesus and find it newly meaningful. And one day you'll feel like Jesus is telling you yes, and another day you'll feel like he's telling you no. And Hanukkah's Judaism's rich and complicated in that way. But faith is a thing. It's a ship to attach ourselves to. And what I have found is that for those who find that kind of a path difficult, it doesn't get you totally off the hook. The more interesting thing is to find that what you find when you find replacements of that in smart recovery and teachers like Eckhart Tolle or whatever, is that you must awaken to the wise within. Hasn't been showing itself, but it's in there. And that as you move out of the insanity of the reliance on unwise sources, you can awaken to rivers of deep wisdom that will be in, like if you look at, there's a thing that values place, a primacy of values in these non-God paths. And that's really important because where do we get our values from? Humanism's a fine place, but that's the wisdom traditions provided values in antiquity. So somehow it's like you never get out of trying to be and do good and stop harm, no matter which way what ship you're gonna attach yourself to. And this is what faithfulness is. It is the trajectory of love and compassion and wisdom and gentleness and hospitality and all those things that I hope you would think are just as important as I do in a civilized day. And the recovery movement, 12 steps that gave us a day at a time, that's one of the most wise things in the world, because I can assure you, I do not practice love perfectly, indefinitely. There's no way I can promise you I'm going to be entirely, there's no way, I don't promise I'm not going to get drunk next week. I promise I'm not going to get drunk today. That's the commitment I make to myself today, and when I get up in the morning, I'm going to make that. And we can seek to live lives of constancy and value and integrity and faithfulness to ourselves and to the God of understanding, the wisdom traditions that we have, as best we can one day at a time. That's a much better marker, much more realizable goal than these pledges of, altruism that are indefinite. Because actually, when we make them that far out, it's like we create some sort of excuse model that, well, we won't do it perfectly. So now we've written the people who are addicted in this room know exactly what I'm talking about. That's like that's the death of this, is as soon as you think, oh, I'll do this perfectly forever, within a week, you're starting to make excuses for why it's okay to not stay on the path. Love, hope, peace, constancy. Just as reliable as the return of daylight in the spring and summer. To me, is God's love. The enduring values that I was taught through my grandparents and my wisdom traditions are ones that I find in all paths. And these I must follow and must forsake the fake pretenders of relief that actually caused me so much harm. So that's what we're here about. We're here about no longer giving Johnny Walker and Jack Daniels and cocaine and heroin and fentanyl and all those sorts of things the time of day. We are no longer welcome at our table in order that we might live in love.